Greetings, weirdlings, it's me, WENDIBOT, your loyal conduit to all things unsettling and unexplainable. Welcome back to another episode of the Wendibros, where your favourite humans, Doug and John, dive deep into the strange, the hidden, and the just plain haunted. Tonight, they're joined by our special guest Christy, and together we're cracking open a collection of true encounters we gathered firsthand at the Saucers Over Appalachia Festival. This is part one of a two-part journey through real eyewitness tales, a family haunting that comforts and terrifies in equal measure, a gentle spirit who comes as a warning, something feral and unnatural lurking in the woods, and yes, a duck with a ghost problem. Listener advisory: this episode contains disturbing themes, strong language, and mentions of violence. It is not suitable for younger listeners. Consider yourselves warned. Settle in, turn down the lights, and let's get a little uncomfortable. This is Saucers Over Appalachia, Stories from the Witnesses, Part 1, only on the Wendibros.
Everyone, this is Doug with the Wendibros, and as always, I have Mr.
It's John Floos.
John Floos, and tonight we have a special guest with us. She's kind of our Wendibro behind the scenes, Christy Herbert. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit about who you are? No, she's not. She's shaking no. So let me brag on her a little bit. So she finds a lot of stories for us. And she does a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff for us, so we're greatly appreciative of her. She was actually at the Saucers Over Appalachia Festival representing Leanne Warren, LLC. We consider her a bro, so she's definitely part of the Wendibros with John and I. John, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Well, tonight, I believe that we're going to be checking out the stories that we were able to collect that people shared with us at the festival. We're going to kind of listen to them, talk about them, and hopefully we'll be able to pick our favorite.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of really good stories that day. Honestly, man, what I was more shocked about was the fact that it actually paid off and it worked well. We got 9 stories during that whole thing, and I was not gonna lie, pretty stunned by that. So
yeah, it was awesome. I mean, people. I think it was a good opportunity for us to be at that kind of environment where people, if you go to UFO festival or UAP festival, then there's probably going to be some people there with strange stories. But honestly, I was more shocked that most of them weren't about aliens.
Yeah, I think most of them were more or less. I think we only had one that was actually alien related, maybe technically 2, and we'll get into that. But for the most part, it was like more supernatural, and I think the way we talked about it was sharing your weird with us. We made it very clear that we weren't just looking for like just alien stories or just ghost stories. Like we're about way more than that. And I think a lot of people, it was funny because we got a lot of, you guys aren't like Zach Bagans, are you? And so we were like, no, we're not like Zach Bagans. Like, we've actually dismissed a lot, and we've actually, have told people to, like, in so many nice ways, I guess, get lost with that, and it's not to be ugly, but it's just, I think we try to keep, as much as we laugh at ourselves and as much as we roast each other, we do try to have a certain sense of integrity, albeit like, this is, I think, a hobby for us, like, and it could be more. I think the festival ended up being a really good turnout for us. I think we got 9 stories, and honestly, that was just 9 recorded stories. We had people coming up to us all day talking about things, and that's what, shocked me. I think at one point I stepped away to go use the restroom, came back, and you and Christy had a friggin' crowd around you, and I was like, what the hell happened? It was it was a lot of fun. Like, I didn't expect it to be as much fun as it was either. Like, and I think it's because we weren't out there pushing or selling anything, and I think we got a compliment on one of our stories, or one of our storytellers, and they made the comment of, if more people were as welcoming as us, that they would probably be more keen to talk more, and I that meant a lot to me. And I don't think you and I, even, there were some things we heard that were outlandish that we didn't record, and we were like, you want to laugh, but I think we kind of kept it as respectful as possible. And I know there was a couple where we not necessarily shoot away, but we were like, that's not really what we're looking for. And
bound to happen.
Yeah. So I think what we're going to do is we are going to listen to the stories, and then after you, the listener, hears that story, we're going to keep a few anonymous, and we get it, and typically that's the ones I really respect the most, because those are the ones I believe the most, that they're going out of their way to tell this story. They want to share it, but I guess they're afraid of what their peers may think or what somebody may think. And, we want to protect that privacy for you. And we don't want you to be laughed at or ridiculed. And like, we want to be a platform where you can be taken seriously. And if we laugh about it, that's even better, but we still respect that privacy. So we're going to listen to those stories, and then we are going to give some commentary on that.
Sure. Well, I don't even remember how old I was, but I was probably preteen, maybe younger.
8 to 10.
Okay. My mom's also next to helping me remember some details. But my grandma, her house, the way it was situated, it had a nice big kind of like private yard next to it. And my cousin had a bedroom there because her and my uncle kind of lived there sometimes. And as kids, my sister, my cousin, and I were always in that bedroom. She had a desk with a computer, which was a big deal at the time because, this is like late 90s, early 2000s, I guess. We played games on the computer, and her bed was right behind it. Well, one day I was playing on the computer by myself, overlooking this window. My sister, my cousin are, I don't know, playing teacher, dress up or something behind me. And I look up from the window, and there's a woman in the window. But it instantly was very jarring to me because of a few reasons. First of all, she, the way she was standing was very odd. It was like her body was facing towards me, but her head was like full 90 degrees, but her eyes were staring straight at me, which I don't even know, like, if that's really...
Kind of reminds me of like Pennywise, like, I don't know. Like,
yeah, I mean, she didn't look menacing necessarily, right. I should say, but just it was, I don't even know if I've ever seen someone otherwise kind of in this weird position. But she also was in clothes that were not modern. She was in, I don't know, probably like some kind of like 1800s, like big dress with, I mean, I wouldn't have known time frame, as a kid, but as an adult looking back, I'm like, she had some kind of big, like, trestle kind of stuff under her skirt. It was like lacy and blue, like corseted. But it was, I saw her, had an instant, my heart kind of went, oh, somebody's outside. I turned to my sister and my cousin. I was like, somebody's out there. You guys look. And it was probably like 2 seconds, me like seeing her, turning to them, saying this, turning back, gone. And we were kind of like, get up in the window, look out, try to see if we can find anybody. Don't see anybody. And it's a big enough open spot in this side yard that like somebody wouldn't have been able to run off so quickly without you seeing them run off. And of course, as a kid, I'm not like comprehending all of that immediately, but I'm very uncomfortable. Like, somebody's out there. again, it wasn't that she specifically made me feel uncomfortable. Like, I wasn't getting, like, bad vibes from her, but just the fact, you know, you're a kid, you think you're kind of, like, in a...
There's something there.
Something that you didn't understand. So then we tell my grandma. She took it pretty seriously. Like, we all, of course, all of us in tow behind her, running out around the house, trying to figure out if anybody's out there, don't find anybody. And I start describing this person to her, and she got really quiet. And then she tells us, she goes, "Oh my gosh, I think it's Annabelle's little girl." Well, my aunt's name is Annabelle, and that used to be her bedroom. And I guess, I'm hopefully going to remember these details correctly, but she starts telling us these stories about how when my aunt was a little girl, she used to see a girl in the house all the time that matched this description. And there was a period of time where, as a kid, Annabelle was really sick, and I think that's when she first started seeing her. And she would tell my grandma and my aunts that this girl would come and visit her in her bedroom, and they thought, "You've been sick, like, you've got a fever, like, you're feverish, you know, like," and then one day, like, she told them that the girl came in, like, put a hand on her, and the next day, like, she wasn't sick anymore. And then for a couple of years, off and on, like, she would see this girl sometimes, and it kind of became a little bit of a family drama where people didn't believe her. And then my grandpa saw her one night. So my grandpa had been, he was a vet. He had been in Vietnam, and he would have pretty bad night terrors sometimes. And it would wake my grandma up. And so it was also... They didn't always know, you know, like, if he did or not, but I think he woke up from a night terror one night, and their bedroom door was open, and he saw a girl walking down the hallway with a big blue, like, I don't know if bustle's the right word, but like a big skirt kind of trailing behind, and woke my grandma up and said, "Who, like, does Annabelle have a friend over? Like, who is this girl?" And my grandma was like, "Go back to sleep, you're imagining things." Yeah, there's several instances. I never saw her again, but apparently lots of different stories between my aunt and then my grandpa also saw. And so my grandma always said she believed, like, she was there for protection.
That's probably why you felt, you know, uneasy but comfortable at the same time.
Yeah, like, it wasn't, I wasn't, like, afraid to be in that room. I wasn't, you know, like, seeing her and thinking, oh, she's going to attack. It was just...
startling to see something that's not supposed to be.
Totally, yeah. And knowing, like, all of this, like, kind of felt very... Like, I knew something was not, like, normal, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, your subconscious kind of picks up on... That's not quite like a natural thing, like the way she's standing or the clothes that she's wearing and things like that. So, yeah, that's kind of my story.
That was good. Thank you. Yeah. All right, so that was our first story of the evening from the Saucers Over Appalachia Festival. So I think, John, you had some... I had to almost be like, John, hold on to that. Like, you know, we're getting ready to go back on, and I need you to talk about that. So John had some thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, that being our first story, I got chills as soon as she started talking about it, and it was just very vivid imagery. I believe every word that they said, but I thought it was interesting that in our last episode we talked about what our next show was going to be about, and it was about near-death experiences and whether that opened you up to otherworldly forces or things like that. And I think it's very interesting that this person's aunt was the first person to see this, I want to say, a spirit or ghost. That seemed to be what they were describing. And I think it was interesting that they didn't start seeing this spirit or ghost until they were really sick. That's when they first saw this ghost or spirit. And it's interesting that, you know, they commented she had a real high fever, and, you know, she could have been hallucinating, but then it touched her and healed her, and they never really felt a malevolent entity. It was more benevolent and protective, and so I think it was a very, very good story. It was definitely a great start to the day.
Yeah, and that's what I took away from it too, is like, I remember sitting there for maybe like, the first 45 minutes, and I was kind of like, man, I don't know if this is going to work, and then she sat down and gave us that story, and I said, well, heck, we're off to a great start, like, and it's and whenever I asked her, I was like, do you feel like this is a malevolent presence or anything like that? The way she described it to me as a child, seeing something like that would be so frightening, because I think, like, what did she say? Her body was turned one way, her head was at a 90-degree angle, and her eyes were looking at her somehow, and like, whenever you picture that, like, the only thing I can think of is like a James Wan Conjuring kind of entity, and like, I wouldn't look at that and say, oh, I'm at peace, like, but I guess it had like a certain type of energy that that made her think otherwise. And that's the thing, though, is sometimes these folks come up to you and they and I like the fact that she was so vivid in her details in a way that it indicated that she truly remembered something that happened. The only thing I would say that would throw me off a little bit would be like the 1800 clothes. And I guess, but if you die in that time period, then maybe that's something that that would happen. You would obviously manifest with those type of clothes. It's just, I guess that's something that you hear a lot of, and I did hear a little bit of that throughout the day. But that would be a compelling story, and I think that her mother actually shared a story right after that. So I don't know if there's some kind of intuition in that family, because, like, what was it? I guess her grandfather saw the same spirit too, and they were able to kind of confirm it. So
that was one reason that they really believed it, is because she said that her grandfather was not superstitious and didn't believe in those kinds of things, and yet at one point he saw the girl and was like, does somebody have a friend over?
Yeah.
And that's when they kind of some of them started to take it seriously, I think, because when Papa or Grandpa or whoever was saw it, and kind of no nonsense in that regard, kind of gave a little bit of weight behind the occurrences.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Anything to add before we go to the next story? I feel like we're doing like an anthology tonight. That's what that's what it kind of feels like to me.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, all right. Anything around the room before we go to the next creepy mystery? To confirm, though, they do not want us to look deeper into their case. Right. So this right here is just an official case closed at this point, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We do have a couple of off-the-record stories to share tonight, and one person that wants us to look into a case that I think is going to be pretty great towards the end, that I'm pretty excited to talk about too. That our very own WENDIBOT was able to detect a lot of stuff and uncover a lot of things too. So before I start rambling, about that, because I'm excited about it, let's go ahead and go into story number 2 from the Saucers of Appalachia.
To my family when I was a little girl. I was 8. I have an older brother who's a couple years older than me. And when I was in 3rd grade and he was 5th grade, our parents sent us to a little Christian school in the community because our school system was not that good. And I remember my brother had to do a book report, and for whatever reason, he decided he was going to do it on Satan worship. This is back in the mid-70s when that was a huge thing going on. It was in the news a lot. And so my mom and he had went to the library, got a bunch of books. We were kind of surprised that the school was even going to let him do this report. And it was, brought the books in, and there was a few things that was kind of weird that happened that my mom I can't remember her saying, but over that weekend, it was a Saturday, I'll never forget. She was in the kitchen cooking lunch, And for whatever reason, we were all around the little table there. And mom and dad always decorated with the old antique stuff. And she had an old churn in the corner. And so you had the countertops like this with the sink here, and then the corner, and then the churn's here, and then up here was the stove. And above the cabinets, there was space where they had collected all of this carnival glass over the years. And there's a lip on the cabinet, so you had to put anything up there, you had to turn it like this and then put it down. So they had these really tall bases up there. And as Nick's at the table with his books and and he's discussing what he's researching with my mom. And all of a sudden, she goes from the stove to the sink, and as she does that, we hear this bang. That is like bang, bang, bang. And we turned and looked, and one of the vases was on the counter. And she's like, how did that happen?
Was it broken, or was it just
Nope, it was just sitting there.
Wow.
Right, just above the corner, just above the churn. And so we were like, okay, that's weird. Daddy gets up, puts it back. She continues working. And in just a minute, bang, bang, bang. Now the churn is broken. The vase is back where it was. And the only thing that we can figure is somehow it came out. It had to come out like this. It came down, hit the churn, and popped back up onto the cabinet or countertop. And my mom looks at my brother and she says, you will get those books out of this house, and you will change your topic, and you will never bring anything like that into this house again. And we never had and they were gone. I mean, and we never had another incident like that in that house again. But that's why I say Ouija boards we don't mess with.
Well,
There's
what I was gonna ask
occult
you,
things we don't mess with, because you invite evil spirits in.
Oh, yeah, you treat it almost like a conduit in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the things that he was talking about, I mean, we were a very independent Baptist, very strict. And so
our last podcast episode, we actually talked to you very much about that.
So, in that with that background, that we were already schooled on what was good and what was bad, but to bring those things into the home and then have an incident where to this day we can't explain it other than the fact there had to be an evil spirit. Something come in and said, I want your attention. And I wish I could remember what he had been talking to her about, but it was something from those books. And, I was 8 years old, I'm not paying attention, but I'll never forget that. And it was terrifying to see my parents upset and scared because, but once those books left and that topic changed, it never happened again. But that vase never did break.
So you kind of just had that negative energy once you removed that catalyst.
Yes.
It really kind of went.
And that vase stayed. It never went back to the top of that cabinet again. It stayed in the corner, pushed back, and they didn't touch it.
It didn't want to be up there.
It did not want to be up there, but yeah.
Now,
So
was this? You say this was your house when you were?
this was actually a different house. Our house burnt when I was 13. It was a home that my parents built, but there was always talk about the land having. Maybe at some point having had Indians living on it, because when they were digging and prepping for the foundations, they found arrowheads and things like that. So even growing up, we always felt that particular land had spirits. The house that we moved into after our home burnt, that she was talking about, it was a very, very old house too, different location, same area, and it had a lot of history of people. It was not quite 100 years old, but it was, and that was in the 80s when they bought it, early 80s, 83. So 50, 60 years at least, if not older. So there was, and we know that there were a lot of folks who died in that home as well, just because that's what you did. People didn't go to the hospitals back then. And so,
right. Yeah.
So it is something that as we've grown up, and and when she told me the story she told you guys, I was like, yeah, right. But then when my dad came out and said, I've seen her, that like I said, he was a very skeptical man. And so when he came out and said, I've seen that, then I was like, oh, okay. This wasn't just a little girl making something up. This was, there's something there.
Yeah.
It's not just an act of imagination. But
Right. So, but not as impressive as hers, but it
No,
was
I
good.
enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Yeah,
Very short.
Thank you both.
It's
so
creepy.
much.
Yeah, it's creepy. And
I want to give you a poster.
Oh, thank
so
you.
don't worry.
oh, and you'll love this. We grew up. This was just outside. This was the county outside of Oak Ridge.
okay.
Oh, okay. I'm familiar with that.
So yeah, we were 30 minutes outside of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So
It's a beautiful area. I used to work
it's
out there a lot,
gorgeous. But yeah, a lot of weird stuff in that area. So
I think that's just the South in general. Like, it's just so, and I'm not just saying that as a knock towards the South. It's just so steeped in history and
yeah,
folklore. And
absolutely.
I think a gentleman we were talking about, I was telling him about a cattywampus story. So I'm an ordained minister.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
just going to go ahead and say this is a good portal, good energy. There's nothing bad about this. It's blessed.
I wouldn't take it if I thought it was.
It's blessed. Don't worry.
So, well, grew up independent Baptist, but have learned over the years to make up my own mind.
Amen. Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. So now you're hearing essentially what's a prequel to the first story, and it's kind of this mother-daughter 1-2 punch. But I think it goes a little bit further than that. I think you almost have something like a familial connection now in a way, because not only do you have mother-daughter intertwined with that story, but you also have grandma, grandpa, kind of confirming. And I suppose the way I took it is that, grandma, believed, in the spirits of that. And I think the whole, that's Annabelle. And then you have the dad who confirmed the sighting that he had seen it. The one thing that I did pick up, and I had to ask John while we were listening to that, is the whole, the mother said that, that had happened to her at 8 years old. With her incident, and you always kind of get the satanic panic in a way a little bit, and that's what that always perks my ears up. But I think people use the word satanic and Satan a little bit too loosely and freely, especially in the South. And, and that's one thing she did touch on, was, about being raised Southern Baptist. That's something that they, and it's so funny how things continue to be related, especially like, the last podcast we had, we talked about synchronicity. We talked about near-death experiences. We talk about all these things, and then we go there to this event, and then, there's just the first two stories. Somehow that intertwines in it too. The one thing that I picked up, though, is that the mother was 8 years old whenever, that incident happened to her. And then she corrected her daughter, saying that you were between 8 and 9 whenever that happened to you. So, I don't know how much I believe in the Satanism side of things. We talk about studying Satan and studying, Satanism. Does that open a portal? I think a lot of it's intent. I think a lot of it's what you give into it, and a lot of that's energy as well too. I don't want to say that they open up a portal, and obviously, and that's one thing we talked about in the WENDIBOT files at the festival, is that, I did handle a case with a potential portal, but what I was able to determine that it was more anxiety based, and this person was really just feeding into it just a lot of negative energy, and she had a lot of trauma going on that she needed to process in a healthy way. I don't think that's happening here. And again, this is me adding to the horror movie of the whole thing, because I think I said Conjuring after the first episode, and I'm not going to say that, I'm not going to dispute what the first storyteller was telling us, but what if there was something malevolent to that, and they possibly did have a portal, opened up and let in a negative entity. And as a joke, that entity said, okay, I'm going to wait until your daughter's 8 years old, and I'm going to throw this at you, and I'm going to play a prank on her at 8 years old. And that's a really interesting story. But it's weird, though, because it's not like it's going after them to harm them. It's not going after them to hurt them. It took a vase and it took it from a shelf to a counter. I think I would take that over shit being thrown at me, part of my language. But then you have, I guess, it manifesting, And I don't care what you say, but if something's twisting its neck and the body's going one way and the eyes are going another, I don't know how much of a good presence that is. And and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to it, but I think that it's, and John said, I think those stories need to go together. And I agree with him on that,
Yeah, I don't know. For a spirit to have their body facing one way, like they're coming towards you, but their head is facing another way, but their eyes are facing frontwards towards you, then to me it's almost like they want to bring to focus that they're looking at something, maybe like if it's not malevolent and it is actually benevolent or benign, then it could have been saying you need to be looking over here. Like there's something over here you need to be made aware of, but I'm looking at you to get your attention.
You got my attention.
I would say you wouldn't have to be staring at me to get my attention if you just appear in front of a window.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is an interesting thing to think it could be the same spirit. They did say that we did ask if it was the same house, and they did clarify that no, it was not the same house, but we do know that sometimes, there's different attachments, and she was one of the details that she was very keen on adding for every time that the vase moved was it banged 3 times, and
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, she said bang 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 twice, and
but isn't there a legend behind, like if you hear, okay, now Christy, you're nodding your head. You're gonna have to.
Just share with us what you're thinking.
Because I'm gonna butcher the story. If you hear 3 knocks or something like that, 3 bangs. What does that mean?
That's just like the typical witching, satanic thing. It's always 3 knocks, or yeah.
So I wonder if it really was 3 knocks, or if that's something that has been kind of ingrained in memory because of the belief in the superstition. I wonder now, but I mean, she said she was 8. She didn't really understand what her brother was talking about, but if her older brother was going into detail about this research into Satan worship with their mother, and I mean, like you said, it could have opened some kind of portal. It could have invited something in. It could have brought that energy.
I'd like to know the content of that, and I'll say that they kept those secrets close, and I think in a way we kind of had to, I was not picking on Mom there, but I said, Mom, you're telling this story, you might as well sit down and talk, and I think that, she was sort of reluctant, we didn't twist her arm, but I think, when she saw what we were about, she was like, okay, yeah, I'll sit down and share that story with you. And I think that, the daughter was like, Mom, like I told mine, you got to tell yours. And it was a pretty fun little thing, but now almost in a way, and I don't want to make their story be in a negative light, but in a way you kind of get 2 conflicting stories as you're prone to do. And when you have one person telling a story, another person telling a story, and they tell a story, in a way though, it does seem very sinister to me, and I don't know how to explain it, but the daughter interpreted it in a way that it was positive, and then maybe the grandmother interpreted it away too. But it's so funny though that they were so steeped into this that just a report of something about Satan scared them enough to where they said, okay, you got to get the stuff out of here. And the Ouija boards, they don't mess with anything like that. And maybe it's not, maybe it's like you said, maybe it is benevolent. Maybe there is nothing there, but in a weird way though, it just seems like a weird afterlife joke to me. It's like, but I didn't pick up on the 3 knocks until you had said that, or the 3 bangs until you had said that. And then that's, that perked my ears up. I'm like, oh my gosh, that, I wish I had my WENDIBOT in here right now, because WENDIBOT would hop right on and clarify that. So
the bang 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 twice, and the butter churn breaking the second time.
Yeah.
was interesting because she was using her hands to map out in the kitchen. I know you can't hear that or see that, but she was showing where the kitchen, the layout, like with where the butter churn was, where the sink was, and the counter, and it was. I think the one thing about this that I find fantastical about the story and unbelievable is that the vase could have fallen, broken the churn, and flipped back up to land on the counter perfectly.
Yeah.
Like that's some kind of trick shot.
Weird
stuff,
things happen.
Yeah,
Weird,
and
weird,
it's possible.
weird things happen,
It's possible.
It's possible. But here's the thing though. Talking to them, I don't. They really struck me as like very no nonsense.
Yeah.
Like they didn't seem like they were spinning a tale. Like they, no. I would say they seem more because they kind of grilled us before they even told the story. To really see what we were about. Yeah. And that's.
He was welcome.
Yeah. I don't think that anything they're saying is false. I'm not saying that it could I'm not saying it couldn't happen.
Right.
But I believe them.
Right, I believe them too. I think what I mean by it's fantastical, I don't believe that that's what happened.
Yeah.
I think that if there was some kind of an entity that was attracted to whatever the vibration, the feeling that was going on, the subject matter, I believe that it would have just moved the vase a second time and broke the churn to get to say, hey, you need to look at me. And it could have been this guardian angel because it could have been saying, hey, you're getting a little too close to this kind of stuff.
Well,
you're opening up
too,
and it if it's the same kind of spirit that this family seems to be seeing over the years, then it could be either way.
It could almost be like a good versus evil. Like you have this one malevolent, one benevolent. Just trying to say, okay, like this is my family. You're not going to mess with them. And then maybe whenever daughter was 8 years old, the benevolent came out and said, "Don't do any reports on Satanism." And so, yeah.
And I'll also add the whole pertaining to Satanism. 333 is half of 666.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The plot thickens. I like this one. So it's and the cool thing is that I think that we're all realizing details that we've missed. Because we were in the kind of the fervor of the festival. We're keeping an eye on things. We're talking to random people. I think you were trying to do that. I was trying to do that, and I know Christy was. And
we have people coming up to talk to us while the other was recording, and that generator on that food truck, I could have killed him.
I know I was recording a story at one point, and there was this guy that came up to me, and he was like, "Hey, what is this? Hey, what is this? Hey, what is this?" And I wanted to be like, we were in the middle of recording. I wanted to be like, dude, like, do you not see us talking? Do you not? Please,
we're gonna get one of those light up signs that says
like
on
air. Yeah, that's a good idea for the next one. So So if you see that on air sign, you catch the WENDIBOT at a festival near you. Shut up. So it's the grown ups are talking. But yeah, no, I think that's actually, it really was kind of like one and the same story. So, all right. So before we get too much into it, and that's our problem. We break down everything probably too much. But I think that we came on to some certain things. So I know that they don't want us digging into this anymore, but if they do listen to this, and anonymously, if they want to share any more details, and I would love to know the contents of the report and why they felt like it was, something that could have drawn some kind of negative energy. And maybe just the negative connotation of it is what brought something in alone. Maybe it wasn't the paper. Maybe it was like Satan, and Satan said, So, all right. So
they made him stop the report and change it. So
not today, Satan.
Not today, Satan.
All right. So story number 3.
All right, weirdlings. Gather round your radios and conspiratorial campfires because this next tale comes straight from the Saucers Over Appalachia Festival vault. Our brave storyteller wishes to keep their name in the shadows, probably smart, given what's apparently following them around, so your resident paranormal parrot, WENDIBOT, will be your guide tonight. I've decided to call this tale, What the Duck? So, settle in, check your closets, and maybe hide your rubber ducks. You're about to find out why. So, I'm a college student in Kentucky, and this past semester I moved in with 2 friends of mine who've been roommates for a while. That's when I found out that one of them has, well, a ghost that apparently just follows them around. At first I thought they were joking, but they were dead serious. They said weird things have happened for years, no matter where they live, and now that I'm living with them in an apartment, I'm about to see even more of it firsthand, especially because I'm actually sharing a room with them. One of the first stories they told me was from when they lived in this old dorm on campus that's kind of infamous for being haunted. Our college is pretty old, so it's believable. Anyway, they said they'd just have books randomly fly off shelves, like not just tipping over, but really flying off when everything was sitting normally. And this is Kentucky, we don't exactly have earthquakes. At their family's house, it's more footsteps and bangs in the attic. They're super chill about it too, like it's just part of life. I think they mentioned they believe it might be an uncle who passed away, but they're not entirely sure. Nothing malicious has ever happened, just a lot of signs that something is there. And then there's the really weird stuff that happens even when they're nowhere around. One time, our other roommate was baking with a friend for a bake sale in a completely different building. The haunted roommate was definitely not there, probably asleep at home because they always go to bed early. But while they were baking, they both heard this roommate's voice call out to them, clear as day. No phone, no recording, just their voice out of nowhere. I've heard other stories too, doors slamming, stuff falling, the usual ghost vibes. I hadn't experienced much myself until one night when both my roommates were gone and I was alone in our dorm. I suddenly got that unmistakable feeling that I wasn't alone. I got up and walked around telling myself I was imagining it, but then I heard something fall. Now this was a little rubber duck we'd stuck onto a light chain with wall putty, as a joke because we hide ducks all over the place in this roommate's room. It was stuck on pretty well, but for some reason that specific duck always fell, and only when I was alone in the dorm. Every single time. So even when this roommate isn't physically around, the weirdness follows. We're not sure if it's a spirit that's attached to them personally, or maybe something they own. But whatever it is, it just brings this strangeness wherever they live, and even to the people they live with. Before this, I'd only ever gone on ghost tours. I'd never really felt or experienced anything myself. But now, I'm kind of living in the middle of it, so I guess we'll see what happens next.
So now we have 3 stories, and so I feel like I've got a bad joke here because you have a mimic, a poltergeist, and a duck walk into a dorm room together. I don't know what the punchline is, but I think that's why we titled it What the Duck. So, you know, I know we talked a little bit about it, you know, from the beginning. There's some conflicting information there, you know, because, you know, are you staying with them? Are you not staying with them? Are you moving in? Are you already there? And it seems, I think John even made the comment of, it seems like they're already spending a lot of time together. Yeah. You know, it's, college is weird anyways. Yeah. College is really strange. You know, and being a young adult is really strange. I think that there's a lot of weird energies that are always going into it, because you're trying to figure yourself out during that time. I don't know what to make of that one, to be honest with you. You know, there is poltergeist activity, you know, but I think, you know, you kind of made the comment of, you know, it almost sounds like a mimic in a way too. Yeah. With the friend that is haunted, their voice being used whenever they're not there. And so I don't want to sound dumber than what I already am, you know, But I brought in the WENDIBOT, and WENDIBOT, let's see here. WENDIBOT, I need you. Are you there?
Hey, WENDIBOT's here to help. What's up?
WENDIBOT, I need you to explain what a mimic is in folklore. We have a potential haunting, WENDIBOT. What? Tell us about a mimic.
Sure thing. In folklore, a mimic is a creature that can imitate objects or beings to deceive others. They often appear as ordinary things, like treasure chests, but when someone tries to take them, they reveal their true form and attack. Mimics are known for their trickery and are often used in stories to add an element of surprise and fear. Sounds like a spooky situation. Anything else you'd like to know?
Okay, so, I think you're stuck in the fantasy realm. This person's actually being supposedly haunted by a mimic. WENDIBOT, what would a cursed object, a mimic, and a poltergeist all have in common in this regard?
Got it. In paranormal terms, a cursed object, a mimic, and a poltergeist share some common traits. 1. Deception. A cursed object can trick or harm its owner, much like a mimic deceives by appearing harmless. Poltergeists often create confusion and mischief, leading to similar deceptive experiences. 2. Unexplained phenomena. All three can cause mysterious and unexplainable events, leaving people bewildered and searching for answers. 3. Interaction with people. Whether it's a cursed object affecting someone's life, a mimic fooling someone, or a poltergeist causing disturbances, they all interact with people in unsettling ways. So, while they come from different lore, they share that element of mystery and unexpected encounters.
Thank you, WENDIBOT. So,
Very well put.
we are dealing with a trickster here.
Yes, to some degree, yes.
Yeah. So, I think it's a funny story. I don't know if that's the right word. It's a funny story. I won't dispute the validity of that story. It's and especially if there's a lot of people experiencing it. I will just say that typically in a young adult's life, there is a lot of energy surrounding that. And there's no disputing that. Like, there's a lot of raw emotion, a lot of everything going on. Now, when they say people are sitting up in the middle of the night and they're saying things, randomly, could it be night terrors? Sure. Why is there a mimic? Why is there a cursed duck? I don't know. It's, is something there that that one of them partook in that we don't know about, that they don't know about, or is it just what is it, just an elaborate hoax?
Yeah, because they're in college, and I mean even outside of college, just at that age, it's fun to prank your friends. It's fun to scare, and the teller of this story, they didn't specify the gender of their of the haunted roommate, because they did say they were getting an apartment together, so it could, they didn't specify what school they went to. We don't know if there could be haunting at a certain school. We just know that it's in Kentucky somewhere, so that kind of leaves it really vague and open. What I would really like,
Kentucky's weird.
Yeah,
Kentucky's weird. I've been out there. It's beautiful.
I just want to talk to the roommate.
Yeah, I do too. But and I think you kind of touched on something too, like with pranks in college. I would hate to think that this could be a prank, and
Right.
and that and I think in a way WENDIBOT kind of started to get me thinking that too. Like there's all this trickery and mischief, and I think that she kind of touched on something too. Like could it be the ghost of a college student still pranking to this day? Mm-hmm. Or could it just be, the college students themselves being the pranksters, and we have some unfortunate prankees. So I believe what they were saying, but I think it's still a little too vague to kind of rule out anything.
Yeah, they did. They added that this person has been this way all their life, mm-hmm. and that they heard footsteps in their attic, and they thought that it was their uncle. or that person's uncle, so they didn't think it was benevolent, but it was almost like, oh, that's, it's just like the dog, like the family dog. It's just, there's no really surprise there. It's just, it's there.
It's just you're used uncle.
It's just the creepy uncle that hides in the attic.
That's just Uncle Ted. He does this all the time. Hey, what the duck are you doing up there, Ted?
Put your clothes on, Uncle Ted.
I know we're making, light of it, but, I think that in a weird way, I think that they were laughing too, because the duck thing, I think they even realize it's a little bit outlandish, but, maybe that's what makes it so believable, is that it is pretty unbelievable at times. And who are we if we're not scrutinizing and having a laugh at a funny story? And we got a few more funny stories, I think. I hope that whatever, and I think they even said, like, I'm kind of reluctant at this point. I would say, be on the cautious side of what you're getting yourself into, and maybe vet them out a little bit, see what your potential dorm mates are up to, that's causing these things, but I would say it sounds like there's a lot of hearsay and a lot of I saw this, but I didn't see this, and I may have saw that, and this person told me that. I would say, and this is life advice from two men that are almost in their 40s, please be responsible and screen people and be aware of what you're getting yourself into. I don't know if I have any more to add to that, and I think WENDIBOT kind of helped out a lot too, is if you're not dealing with a prankster spirit, then you are dealing with a prankster, period. And I think that's important to realize too. So I'm not a father, John is, so I'll be the creepy uncle in this case and say, here's life advice from your creepy Uncle Doug. Just do your due diligence when going out into the real world and it can be scarier than any ghost. Yeah. All right. Anything to add around the table?
They'd have to be really cool people for me to move in with them.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So, on to story 4.
Hey everyone, this is Doug with the WENDIBOT. John has stepped away briefly. We're at the Saucers Over Appalachia, and I'm with Sam King, and she's going to share a story with the WENDIBOT today. So, Sam, welcome on. Let us know what your story is.
Thank you. So, growing up, from the ages of 3 to about 7, I lived in an old farmhouse. It was over 100 years old. It was over 100 years old, and from the time we moved in, there were things that went on. There was a light in the dining room downstairs that when you turned it off and went to bed, it would turn back on.
Oh, wow.
So we had to turn the light on before we went to bed, and then it would turn off, and like the switch would flip and everything.
So the switch would actually flip up. So it wasn't really an electric. It's like something physically was actually grabbing it.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
And then when you were outside, it was a 2-story farmhouse, and there was like a window in a little hallway.
Yeah.
And there was an old lady in a rocking chair that would sit in that window, but you could only see her from outside.
Oh, wow.
And then every Christmas Eve, the rocking chair would turn, and it would smell like a fire.
Uh-huh.
And no matter what we did with the propane to heat, we would be out of heat on Christmas morning. And when we went to leave the house, the bricks in my parents' bedroom, every time they closed the door on the last look through, would fall. And finally we just left so it wouldn't fall anymore. But it was a really neat house to live in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it sounds like, we used to live on a farmhouse in Maryland. That's where I was originally from. and we actually had a ghost in our. I say ghost, but that's what my parents called it. And my mom swore up and down that she saw a gentleman in a Union Civil War uniform, and they would nickname him Marshall. So that we would always say, "Oh, Marshall's throwing things," or "Marshall's dropping something." So I think there's something interesting about old farmhouses, especially and what they were used for. Did you feel like the presence there was warm, or did you feel threatened, or anything like that?
I felt like it was warm.
Warm, so it's kind of like a safe guardian spirit in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. We've had a few on here today, and they've talked about. That I don't know how I felt about it. I felt uneasy, but I don't know if I felt threatened. So do you know if it was like an electrical issue, or is it just like something physically there? Or?
I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But 100-year-old house.
Yeah.
But the fact that the switch actually flipped.
So did you actually see the switch flip up or down?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So you actually saw like movement. So
yes.
That's pretty crazy.
It was really neat.
How old were you at that time?
It was going on when I lived there from the ages of 3 to 7.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we rented the house for a really good price.
Yeah.
Because they hadn't had a tenant stay there for more than 6 months.
Right. Wow. So, has there been any more activity since, I know you said between 3 and 7. Have you always been pretty receptive to a lot of that stuff, or has it ever happened again?
I've always had feelings about that stuff. Both houses I've lived in, there were things I couldn't explain, but
just knew something was there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else to share? Or?
Well, a few years after we moved out, the house burned down on Christmas.
Oh my God. Well, that's crazy. So you said I think you said the one spirit was a lady that would appear on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Do you know of anybody that passed away? Did you ever have the history of that house?
There was the lady that lived there. By this point, she was an older lady, but it had been her house until it became a rental house, and she had passed away.
So she kind of stayed there and made sure things were taken care of. Well, I guess she liked you so much that she didn't want you to leave, and so the house, she was like, "Well, I don't want anybody else here, right?" Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's a good ending, or it's definitely a warm ending. So it's all right. Well, Sam, thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anything else you want to share?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Let's get you that post.
So I think that was a pretty interesting story. And I don't know if everybody heard my joke at the end, and I apologize to anybody I may have offended with it. I don't tend to have the best filter. I typically just stumble upon what I think is a good joke at the time, and I usually just say it. But I can't take all the blame. I think John does the same thing too. We like opportunities, and that's what we seek are opportunities. So, but to be on a very serious note, we do hate that the house did catch on fire and burned down, especially on Christmas Eve. Thankfully, that family had left and they were away safely. There's a lot to take away from such a short story. It was less than 5 minutes. But, the one thing in there that, really, because I think after we were talking about it, we discussed what's obviously a propane leak. And we do know that propane leaks can cause hallucinations, it can cause confusion, it can cause nausea, and I think that's one thing that they had talked about was that the propane tank was heating the house, was full on, Christmas Eve, and then on Christmas Day it was completely empty. They were seeing this entity in a rocking chair outside that was an old woman who would always face the source of heat on Christmas Eve. And but here's the thing that when it comes into hallucinations, and Christy and I, we actually had a massive propane leak in our home whenever we took it over and started doing mass renovations. It was our only source of heat in the house at the time, and that's what we had to rely on. It was the middle of winter, and it was very frigid, very cold. We were confused. We had tons of anxiety. We couldn't figure out why, and we were nauseous, just feeling generally unhealthy. And we would talk about this propane leak. We would call the propane company, and everybody was saying, "You guys are crazy. Propane's super safe." One night I it was during the California wildfires. They actually had, filters on Amazon, air purifiers on sale for drastically reduced, to kind of help out California. I ordered those, and they were high-end ones, and as soon as I turned them on, our air levels went to red, and it had picked up on the propane leak. We call the fire department probably about 12 a.m. They come out, and they say, you have a massive propane leak, which we had been complaining about this entire time. What I'm saying, though, is, to summarize, is that, yeah, it can cause a lot of serious issues within your home. What makes this very different is that they were only seeing this presence on Christmas Eve. And the propane tank was drained, and maybe it was a bad omen, maybe it was trying to warn them. And in some weird way, like you have, I guess you have a really great Christmas gift by having this, old lady watching over your house saying, hey, you guys got a propane leak. I'm going to drain this tank completely on Christmas Eve as a gift to you guys. That way you all don't burn down. Right. Because the house didn't burn down until they moved out. In the house, to reiterate, the house burned down on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, like what 3 years or something?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
Yeah. So, and it just makes me wonder, and I know that she had mentioned that they had rented the house out or they had been renting the house, got it for a really good rate, but nobody would last there for more than 6 months, because of the activity. And the other thing that I picked up too is, that they would find the light switch or see the light switch move up and down. And at first I was like, are you talking about the breaker board? Like, yeah, that's going to flip. And she said, no, it's the light switch. To me, that's, and it's weird. I think like the general theme that we're kind of getting through this, other than the mischievous, poltergoose in the one story, is, I see opportunities, I go for it. Is that we have a general theme of good ghosts or good entities, for the most part. Even whenever you talk like the Satanism one, you still had this kind spirit that was like, hey, we got your back. And I would love to have a grandma ghost that puts out my fire every Christmas Eve to make sure that we're safe on Christmas Day. So I think that there's something very beautiful in that. I didn't mean to take the whole story over, but
no, that's okay. No, it's fine. I think it's interesting though that you point out that what makes this story different than like a propane overdose, so to speak, is that one of the things is I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it was like kind of hard to hear a little bit there, but they say they could see the ghost from outside looking in.
Yeah, I think that's what
they could see.
And then the rocking chair would actually move towards the source of heat.
The source of heat. So if they're outside and seeing the ghost, then if you're out in fresh air, then I wouldn't say that you're possibly hallucinating. And I think that you bring up a good point of them, like the ghost maybe being kind of like a guardian, keeping them safe. Because if I looked into a house and I saw an old woman sitting in a rocking chair and I didn't know who she was, I knew she wasn't supposed to be there, probably freak out, probably decide to leave.
Yeah.
And they're saying they can't keep people in this house for more than 6 months. This ghost is running people off, but they're not hurting any. It's not hurting anybody. It's warning them. It's trying to keep them away. So maybe this spirit did know what was going to happen, or maybe something similar happened to them.
Yeah,
and
maybe they were a victim.
They could have been.
Yeah. Honestly, it was a really solid story, and I think that at the time, I think Christy was dealing with a passerby, and I was trying to focus on the passerby that was talking to her, saying a lot of crazy stuff at the festival that I was not able to completely focus on our storyteller for this one, which I apologize. But now, really listening to it, really, what a wonderful story, and it's almost like you got a bad omen with a good entity, like, like, hey, a harbinger, a harbinger in a way, and it's, yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to be haunted, you want to be haunted by something that's like, let me blow out the candle before the curtains catch on fire. And I can't think of a better haunting than that. And I think that's what I said at the end. Like, I said, in a weird way, it's a really good ending, and I inadvertently said the warm ending thing, obviously, but it, I meant it in a way to be nice, I word salad sometimes.
Yeah, it was funny is because you asked if the entity
Multiple
was benevolent or malevolent or warm, if they made you feel warm. I was like, what?
So a malevolent situation with a warm spirit that helped this family live and prevent a warm mishap.
Right. Yeah. A warm ending.
There you go.
Different kind of warm
hot
ending.
mishap.
That's how I justify myself with my poor taste sometimes. So.
Shoo, we don't like no hot mess up in here.
All right, so it's been a great anthology so far. On to, was it story 5? 6? 5? We're going to figure it out on the WENDIBOT.
Hey there, late night truth seekers. Before we wander into these woods together, a quick heads up. This next anonymous story involves unsettling sounds, a sense of being hunted, and a brief mention of an injured animal. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you're sensitive to stories involving animal harm. Alright, my midnight hikers, tighten those bootlaces and switch on your headlamps, because this next confession comes fresh from the shadowy woods near Falcon Lake. The storyteller wishes to stay off the grid, so naturally you've got me, your cryptid companion WENDIBOT, to whisper this one straight into your ears. I call this one The Thing in the Trees. Here we go. So, this happened near Falcon Lake. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but here's what went down. We were out walking, my dad and I, and there's this little spot where you can step off the main trail and get a better look at the lake. It's just a short detour, nothing big. So I went down to check it out for a second, then came back up and we kept going. We hiked a while, got near the top of the mountain, and then turned around to head back. I usually walk a bit faster than my dad, so I was about 30 feet ahead of him, just ambling along. I stopped for a second to check out this plant by the side of the trail. That's when I heard it. Behind me, back in the trees where it's thick and dark. I couldn't see a thing in there, but I heard something. A noise that didn't belong. It was somewhere between a scream, a gargle, and a growl. Just wrong. It froze me for a second. Then the fear kicked in and I ran, and behind me, clear as day, I heard footsteps crashing through the underbrush, chasing me. I bolted down the trail, back toward that little side path where I'd stepped off earlier, and right there, sprawled across the trail, was a deer, dead, fresh. Its throat had a huge gash, deep enough that I knew that's what did it in. But the weirdest part? On its side, the fur was ripped away in a perfect triangle or square, like something with claws had peeled it off in a shape. It didn't look like a hunter's work. There was no gunshot, no other people around, just us, and the forest that had gone completely silent. Blood was still seeping out. It couldn't have been dead long. We didn't see any wildlife at all. No birds, no rustling, nothing. Just that horrible quiet, and whatever was out there that made that sound. We left, fast. And to this day, I don't know what I heard, or what left that deer like that.
So after hearing that story, it's I would say it's definitely a traumatizing story, especially if you're at a younger age, an impressionable age, and you come across, obviously a very fresh, and again, trigger warning. And I'm sure that we put that at the beginning of the episode anyways, but you have a fresh killed deer out in the field, and according to this storyteller, it was still pumping blood out from the wound, and I guess where it gets a little bit peculiar is that, despite the laceration, on its neck, which I think they stated that it was torn or ripped, there was a perfect triangle and or square there, and I wasn't really able to get, exactly what it was, and maybe he looked at it, and I guess from a certain angle it could look like a diamond, which could also be perceived as a triangular shape. What I'm leaning towards here is nothing, and we can go into this all day, and try to sensationalize it and say what we're looking at here is a ritualistic cult, who sacrificed a deer and, put a triangle on it, and it's the upside down. But I don't think it was anything that nefarious. I would definitely gravitate towards the realm of a predator and prey situation. We were dealing with, especially out here in this region, mountain lions, bobcats, bears, it could have been any of that. I think a bear probably wouldn't have left much. No. But if you have something that's feline, like a bobcat, that's a very easily spooked creature, and so if I were a hiker and I was hiking up a hill and I'm not a bobcat, but if I were a bobcat, I would say intruder alert and take off from that fresh kill and come back for it later. I think in many ways it kind of checks out, because a bobcat or mountain lion's probably going to immediately go for the throat to kill, and that would be the rip and tear, and crazy things happen, especially in the animal kingdom, that we don't think could happen. We have 6 cats in our house. Too many, love them, but too many. No, we got too many. And they do things where I'm like, how in the heck did you all do that? Like, how did you manage to do that? Pets are crazy enough as is with their intelligence and how they're capable of doing things. So I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility that a bobcat or mountain lion got a hold of this deer, ripped its neck, and in the struggle where they kicked their back legs, took out a tuft of that hair. I don't know if there's much more to elaborate on that. The only other scenario that I can think of is that, you could have possibly had somebody that came through. You hear a lot about wannabe hunters out there that want to take claim for a dead animal that they found. But typically they'll cut off the antlers and say, oh yeah, I shot this buck, out in the woods, and oh, look how awesome I am, whatever. Or they could have came by and said, oh, what a beautiful deer, I'm going to take a tuft of its hair. Weird to me, but, not weird to somebody else. I'm leaning more towards a predator and prey situation here, there too, and I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but, that's...
I think that makes the most sense, because if it was a hunter or a person, then I think they would have been more likely to hear or see that person as they were, leaving. I know they said that they kind of strayed off the path a little bit and then heard some kind of gargling, growling, snarling sound.
That's a good point, too.
So obviously, if you hear some kind of a gargling sound, then it's probably the death throes of the deer.
Or it could have been
a cat,
like,
or
cat
wild cat.
Full of, deer meat.
Yeah,
bobcats sound weird.
Yeah, they sound terrifying in the woods at night. And we'd hear some of that out in Georgia. And it would be a very bizarre and unsettling sound. Yeah. I think whenever we had Mikey on the show, a few times, I think we had to explain to him exactly what a bobcat could sound like, and it's a terrifying sound. And I would equally add like a coyote at night, a bunch of coyotes. Mm-hmm. That is an unsettling sound to hear. So I don't think that there's a lot more to add to that, and it's not just to kind of dismiss it, because that's not what we're doing. I think it's definitely a traumatizing event, and I hate that they came across it, and especially for animal lovers out there, I would say that's very upsetting, to come across. But, I think it's just an act of Mother Nature with an odd pattern, is the way I would pretty much close that case a little bit.
they did seem okay, at least enough to tell the story comfortably and calmly. So
Yeah.
hopefully it wasn't very traumatizing.
Yeah. So, but we appreciate that story anyways. I think that's one that we can pretty much, open and shut the book on that. A lot of weird things happen in the Appalachian woods. That's for
Definitely a scary thought, though, that
Yeah.
if you step off the path for just a few moments, you come back and there's a dead animal there, then whatever killed it is close by. And thankfully, them moving around scared it away. So no person got hurt. Obviously, we don't want animals to get hurt, but
and I think that's a good warning too, especially out in the woods, you don't know what you're going to run into. It's not always going to be Bigfoot. It could be something very tangible, something very real. And that's why it's important to observe your surroundings. We have animal issues right now, that are happening. So if you hear a squeaky toy in the background, that is a vicious predator catching his prey right now. So, and with that said, story 6.
Well, strange travellers, you've survived part 1 of Saucers Over Appalachia. I'm WENDIBOT, and I'll be your shadow in the corner until we return with even more whispered confessions in part 2. Special thanks to Doug, John, and our fearless guest Christy for braving these stories with open minds, and to all the storytellers who trusted us enough to share their truths. Tonight's episode was brought to you by Leanne Warren, LLC, Real People Helping Real People. Our haunting theme, Midnight Remembrance, is by our dear friends at Songs of Salem. Give them a listen, preferably on a foggy midnight. Until next time, keep an eye to the skies, your ears to the dark, and remember, some things follow you home, whether you believe or not. This is WENDIBOT, and you've been listening to the Wendibros. Sleep tight.